Today, we're going to talk about Leonardo and his fascination with water. Then we're going to have a cooking demo. I'm Elaine Trigiani. I'm an art historian. I worked at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. for a decade before moving to Italy to work with food and culinary travel. I also make olio della donna, olive oil. Here's some images from our most recent olive harvest. On the line with us tonight is Lorenzo Girolami. He's a Florentine chef and actor. He's my tech assistant on our online programs, and he also helps out on travel programs. We have these trips on the books: Tuscany, Sicily, and Puglia. If you have any other destination in mind, we would be happy to organize custom trips. Today, we're going to go to central Italy. You can see the path of the Arno River on this map. It originates high up on Monte Falterona, flows down around Prato Magno and through Florence to the sea. Lorenzo is coming to us from Florence. Leonardo was born at Vinci, about half an hour to the west of Florence, and I'm coming to you from Poppiano. This is where I live at the Castle of Poppiano. That's my house there on the right. And then just up the street from us is Vinci, where Leonardo was born. He was actually born in that house that you see there on the right, in a little hamlet called Anciano, just outside the village. I also included a self-portrait of Leonardo and then his signature. He famously wrote from right to left. He was left-handed, so as to not smear the ink. He didn't write the way most of us do, but he wrote from right to left. I flipped the image there for you so that you can see it. His father was Ser Piero, a notary in the city of Florence. That was and still is a very powerful profession. It's kind of like having a lawyer studio. So Leonardo was born in 1452 to Caterina and Ser Piero, and this was just before Ser Piero married another woman who became his wife, and they had a large family together. So Leonardo was an illegitimate child, which meant that he did not receive any higher education, just kind of basic elementary education. And then he, of course, did not enter the notary track. Oddly enough, his father, the notary, never legitimized his famous firstborn son. So in the end, Leonardo inherited nothing of his father's estate even. So it kind of sounds like he got the short end of the stick. But basically, all of that allowed him to escape being a notary, sitting in an office and drafting contracts, which is what his brothers ended up doing. So since he wasn't in school, Leonardo at age 12 was trained as a craftsman in the bottega of Andrea del Verrocchio in Florence. So Verrocchio's workshop was a big one. There were lots of important artists present. They worked on sculptures, paintings, objects. Their studio was in the streets here behind the Duomo, and one of the objects that was produced in the studio during the time that Leonardo was there was the gold ball there on the very top of the Duomo. They made the object and installed it in 1471, and Leonardo remembers this very well. He wrote about it later in his notebooks. It must have been a real feat of engineering. These are two sculptures that were designed and cast in the Verrocchio workshop when Leonardo was there. On the left, the early Renaissance masterpiece, Christ and St. Thomas. This is on the facade of Or San Michele. It dates to about 1467. If any of y'all have been to Florence, you've probably seen this. And then on the right is the statue of David, 1465. Leonardo would have been about 12 at this time. He would have just entered the studio. Legend has it that Leonardo was the model for Verrocchio's David. You can see those very fine features of the face, that great curly hair. We have no way to confirm that, but who knows? Maybe. This painting was done in the Verrocchio workshop in 1475. This is the Baptism of Christ. It's oil on panel. It's gigantic. It's almost 6 feet by 5 feet. So Leonardo now is about 20 years old. He's still in the workshop of Verrocchio, and he participated in this painting. So Leonardo was responsible for painting the landscape and also the angel on the left. So take a look at the angel. You can see that he's got very lifelike drapery that clearly delineates the form of the figure underneath, even down to the sole of his foot here. And his pose really indicates this act of turning towards the holy scene. This angel has been kind of busied with dealing with the clothes of Christ. Christ handed off his clothing as he got into the river to be baptized, and the angel took them. And it's almost as if he has been distracted, or he's kind of caught out of the corner of his eye what's going on with the Baptist baptizing Christ, and this angel has turned in order to watch the holy scene. That's kind of a hallmark of Leonardo, the torsion of the torso. Take a look also at the way he's dealt with the landscape. In the foreground are, very carefully represented rocks, and there's like a cat o' nine tail or something, very much like a still life, really. And then you can see the care he's taken to paint the stratified riverbank, the kind of broken rocks of the riverbank. And take a look at the way he's shown the water, which is moving back into space, not toward us, but away from us. It's kind of wrinkling up around the ankles of Christ. Also notice how the skin of Christ in the Baptist that's underwater is painted differently than the skin that's above water. That's because we perceive it differently underwater. So, their feet that are underwater are clearly in a different space than the rest of their body that's outside of the water. So Leonardo has clearly studied all of these details very carefully in order to represent them in this painting. Leonardo's contribution to this painting really hints at his wide-ranging interests. So it's very clear that Leonardo is very good at art, and I think he would have been very good at anything that he was really interested in. And I'm not so sure he would have chosen to be an artist had he been given the choice, which he really wasn't. He was 12 when someone else decided he was going to join Verrocchio's workshop and become an artist. And in fact, he really didn't describe himself as an artist. Most people probably think of him that way, but he described himself as an engineer, an architect, as good with hydraulics, a military engineer, cartographer, scenographer, and oh, I can also paint and sculpt as well as anybody. That's how he described himself in a job application, basically. So when he decided to leave Verrocchio's studio, he presented himself to potential patrons, and he ended up working with people who needed all of those skills, right? They needed military engineers and stenographers and whatnot. So he ended up leaving Florence. He lived in Milan. He went back to Florence at a certain point, right around 1500. He was in Rome. He ended up in France, where he actually eventually died in 1519 in service of the king. Here you can see some of the drawings he did in preparation for these pageants that were done at court. So this would be his skill as scenographer. He invented these fancy costumes for the knights on horseback that you can see there on the left. This was a pretty common thing at these at court. They would have these very elaborate pageants with the costumes and special effects and entertainment and whatnot. The drawing on the right is cannons shooting out mortar shells, which could actually perhaps be a military machine as much as it could be perhaps, and we don't know, a special effect used at one of these banquets. Someone who participated in one of the banquets made a remark. We have this guy's comment saying that the banquet was wonderful and this great pageant, and Leonardo had invented these mortars that shot out basically little balls that bounced all over the place. Like, just imagine a ton of ping pong balls. And the guy said, oh, it was so fun. Everybody was delighted and it was great. Nobody got hurt, right? So they were these, I don't know how he designed little bouncy balls that he could kind of shoot out of a cannon, but he did. These are actually war machines. So you've got a scythed chariot up on the top. On the bottom is the tank. You can see it uncovered on the left and then with its cover on the right. Leonardo was military engineer to the Sforzas in Milan. He was general architect and engineer to Cesare Borgia after that. So he was actually on the battlefield with these patrons, and he saw some combat, and he designed machinery that could be useful to them. The scythed chariot on the top, I mean, if you ride through enemy ranks, you can just chopping people up left and right. He designed a way that you could raise the blades so that when you're in home territory, there's no friendly fire, basically. It's been said that Leonardo was just kind of disgusted with combat and just, was absolutely horrified by the gore that he witnessed. He definitely took in all the details. He used it later for battle scenes. He was very aware of how to then represent combat. He actually talked about including the effect of the dust, for example, that he's kicked up here on the left side of the tank. So he kind of did this for work, but he wasn't super thrilled about it. He was, though, definitely enthralled by nature and relentlessly curious. One of the great Leonardo scholars, Martin Kemp, who worked on an exhibition at the National Gallery when I was there. We worked on the exhibition called 1492, Art in the Age of Exploration. So right in this period when Leonardo's doing all of these studies and moving around between patrons, Martin Kemp, the scholar, refers to Leonardo's nature studies as study of the macrocosm and the microcosm. That is, the study of planet Earth, basically, as the microcosm, and the human body as the microcosm. And Leonardo studies them both in the most minute detail, looking for parallels and trying to really understand the natural processes and discover the fundamental laws that govern the natural world. One of those would be ramification. And here you can see comparisons that he made between ramifications of rivers and streams on the left and the human circulatory system on the right, branching off, veins branching off into vessels, into capillaries. He believed, Leonardo, that the understanding of the science of water could reveal the organization of the function of nature. And then he went on to apply those theories to air, and then he went on to actually, into natural applications and brought things to bear for his patrons. Here he's studying water in movement around an object and how it behaves differently if the impediment is inserted at a different angle. He's studying water as it falls into a pool. And he actually observes three different phenomena here: the descent of water towards the earth, the movement in the direction of the current, and the motion of the vortexes that erode the banks in the riverbed. And on top of that, there's the air that's pulled underwater by this cascade, by this waterfall. And he's rendered even the little air bubbles that form and then pop up at the surface. He studied currents, cross currents. He studied streams on various stream beds. He realized that the surface current moves more quickly than the current that is on the bottom of the river if the riverbed is not even. He studied what he called percussion. So that is how the motion of the water, the eddies, the vortexes would act against riverbanks. And he performed these studies tossing little grass seeds into the water so that he could actually see the various currents as they moved along. I mean, he was doing all of these studies with the naked eye. He's particularly fascinated by eddies and vortexes. And you can see how meticulously he's sort of looking at these various movements. He called himself un uomo senza lettere, uneducated. He had no classical education. He doesn't read Greek. He doesn't read Latin. He has not had that classical education that his brothers were given, for example. But he is a very modern thinker. He is clearly using the scientific method a good century before it's codified by Sir Francis Bacon. He was completely unbiased in his observation. He knew what common thinking was on lots of these theories that he goes to kind of then blow out of the water. He knew what it was. He worked to understand why previous scientists invented, I say scientists, they called them philosophers, let's just say people who studied natural phenomenon, why they came up with certain theories. And then he performed his own studies, observed very closely, and then either accepted or did not accept their formulations, and then worked out his own theories because of his own observation, put them to use, and really made new discoveries based on his observations. He is gone here running with his fascination with eddies and vortexes, which led him to deduce correctly that the vortexes of blood in the chambers of our heart are responsible for controlling the heart valves, which open and close and let blood into and out of the heart. He also figured out that the heart's a muscle. That's new information. He's the first one to have figured that out. Um, the experiment that he did on the heart valve is he proved it by making a cast of a cow's heart. He injected molten wax into the heart. He made a mold. He knew how to do this because he was working on those sculptures with Verrocchio. So he made a mold in wax. He cast it in glass and then proceeded to pump water through the heart, again with little grass seeds, so he could actually see how the currents moved within the chambers of the heart. Western medical science kind of rediscovered this and proved this in the 1960s. That's over 400 years later. So oddly and kind of sadly, Leonardo did not publish his findings, and we don't really know why. It could have been procrastination, which he was sort of famous for. It could have been because he was a uomo senza lettere. He was not classically educated. He may not have felt that he could even put forth a publication. I don't know what the answer is, but he did not publish that. He did not publish his findings. He sort of showed people, but they weren't printed. And he was familiar with printing, publishing houses in Venice. It was kind of a new, the printing press was developed, very shortly before he started writing all of this stuff. So, and there were, in fact, editing houses in Venice. He could have presented it, but apparently he didn't do that. He would have greatly contributed to the body of knowledge and, kind of saved us a lot of time, basically. A lot of his discoveries were rediscovered centuries later. Here's another sheet with more studies of water on it. Studies of water on one hand, and then an old man resting on the other side. Leonardo's superpower was this clear and careful observation of the natural world, again, all with the naked eye. Later scientists are shocked that he's able to actually see, elucidate, and then illustrate certain natural phenomenon, which today people would do using, lots of modern equipment. And Leonardo just had his eye, which he, of course, trained very carefully. He had this just crazy level of curiosity mixed with this desire to observe and then meticulously record all of his findings. So here on this page, he's got 4 studies of water, this nice old guy on the left, and a couple little curls down here, and then these notes. And the notes are actually a comparison of swirling water and hair. And he writes, observe the motion of the surface of the water, which resembles the behavior of hair, which has 2 motions, one of which depends on the weight of the strands, the other on the line of its revolving. Thus, water makes revolving eddies, one part of which depends on the impetus of the principal current, and the other depends on the incident and reflected motions, percussions. Crazy. So he's kind of comparing the way water works to the way hair swirls in the braids of hair. And what you're looking at here on the right are studies for the head of Leda, which were done for a painting called Leda and the Swan, one of the Greek myths. And the painting has been lost. It was destroyed. It was on a panel that basically broke into pieces, and the paint just fell off. But we have these studies. You can see Leda, the model anyway, has pulled a braided wig onto her own hair, which is kind of escaping out and fluttering out kind of around her face and over her ears. Absolutely gorgeous drawing of the hair, but not only. Look at how he modeled her face. He used these kind of curved cross hatchings. Gorgeous, gorgeous drawing, really just, a few strokes of brown ink and some black chalk. He dove down deep to study water as a pure element of the earth. He asked himself the question, how does a water drop form and how does it stay there? Here he is studying a drop of water. He figures out surface tension. He moves on to create practical applications using his knowledge in hydraulic engineering, and he works in Milan, Venice, at the Vatican. He drains swamps, digs and perfects canals, builds dams, sinks foundations for bridges. Here is sketches. Here are, it's one sheet of paper with various kind of sketches for projects on the Arno River. He was working with Niccolo Machiavelli in Florence. This is around 1500. The Arno passes through Florence, which you see on the right, goes through the countryside and out, goes through Pisa and out to the coast. So the Arno is vital for Florence. It's also dangerous because it's subject to flooding, and the Arno River is not navigable up to Florence, which means that Florence has to pay duties to Pisa at the port for all ocean cargo, of which there was tons. And by the way, they were at war with Pisa, so they were kind of trying to figure out ways to dis Pisa. So Leonardo now goes from the surface tension of a drop of water to how to move the entire river, Arno. He sees water here as a very powerful force of nature, to be very carefully dominated. Dominated is not a good word because I think he knew it couldn't be dominated, but you could sort of encourage it to perhaps go in a way that was more advantageous for you. So again, you can see the flow of the Arno goes through Florence, goes through the countryside, goes through Pisa, which is here, goes out at the Tyrrhenian Sea. So the plan number one here that you can see is a canal that would bypass a bunch of rapids. This would be helpful for flood control. It would also make the Arno navigable, the waters of the Arno navigable up to the city of Florence. And then together with Machiavelli, they figured that since Pisa is a maritime empire, if they can deprive Pisa of the river, of their outlet to the sea, then that would be the end of Pisa. And so they planned to, and actually began digging 2 canals that were to take all of the river out of the Arno and have it exit the sea down at what is today Livorno. That project was started. It was not finished. It really wasn't working. It got flooded. They gave it up. But in working on that project, Leonardo was down in southern Tuscany studying waterways. He created this map of Tuscany in 1503. Again, just kind of a feat of cartography. There, he did not have a drone at his disposition, obviously. And he was able to very accurately map the waterways of the Chiana Valley, including the Arno and Tiber rivers. The idea here is to regularize the level in that canal so that the Arno could be navigable up to Florence. And they were going to do this by installing and operating dams and sluices at the inflow points and outflow points of the Arno. You can see here, the Arno's over here. This is the Chiana Valley. You can see Cortona, Siena. Excuse me. I have to adjust my fire.
You have to take a drink.
I think you're right.
You
And I
have
to
to
have
drink.
a glass of wine. It's after 5.
Yeah.
We're good. So near Arezzo, we're looking at Cortona, Siena, and Arezzo. Near Arezzo and the Arno Valley that moves on towards Prato Magno, which is this way, are these very kind of curious, unique to this area, formations called the Balze of the Upper Arno Valley. They were formed by the recession of a Pliocene era lake. That's 5 million years ago. And Leonardo actually figured this out. He realized that this whole area had been submerged by a prehistoric lake. He drew these formations. He's studying sedimentation and erosion. He threw in some ducks down here. He realizes that the earth itself was not made in 7 days, like it says in Genesis, which was sort of accepted knowledge at that point. He realized that slow evolution over time, due in part to the action of water, is what caused the earth to look the way it does. He also figured out that fossilized seashells that are found in high levels, up on top of these Balse, for example, were not the result of the Great Flood, Noah and the Ark and all that. He thought that through and said that had that been the case, then the floodwaters that brought the seashells up there would have brought them right back down. And he realized that the fossils that he was seeing were of sea creatures that had lived up there, died up there, and their shells were deposited there. Therefore, this area was underwater, which in fact it was. He could have been, but wasn't prosecuted for heresy for that. But he was just being very clear-headed about his deductions. So in the same area of Arezzo, this is the city of Arezzo. I'm going to blow it up for you. This is the Google over here on the right is kind of turned in a different direction, but you can see Arezzo, Chiasa, and then Quarata and Ponte a Boriano. Here's Quarata and Ponte a Boriano. Close up. Quarata, Ponte a Boriano. If you look really closely, you can see that the Ponte a Boriano is the bridge at Boriano, and it's a medieval bridge that crosses the Arno River, and it's still standing, 5 arches crossing over the river at Boriano. It was built in the mid 1200s, and you can go and see it, and you can pose with this really tacky bust of Leonardo, which they have put there because Leonardo was here, and he really was. And he also used the bridge, the Ponte, in the background of various works of art, such as this one. This is the Madonna of the Yarn Winder. It was commissioned by Florimond Robert, who was the secretary to King Louis XIII of France. It is now in a private collection in the United States. It's the Madonna and Child, clearly, and the Madonna is spinning yarn, and the Christ Child has taken what is the yarn winder. You know, she would wrap her yarn around this, and it's very clearly a little cross formation, which Christ has taken. So both Christ and Mary in this moment are foreseeing the future. Christ very willing to accept his fate, and Mary, willingly or not, is letting Christ go because that, of course, is her fate. And all of this is happening with lots of clear detail of the geology of the Arno Valley. You can see sedimentation and stratification in the foreground. The background is clearly the Val d'Arno with the Balze, the Ponte a Boriano. And then the recession into space, Leonardo painted, putting into practice his theory of aerial perspective. And what Leonardo said, he wrote, you know that in the atmosphere of in an atmosphere of equal density. So we're talking about, particles of, minute water vapor, basically. The remotest objects seen through the atmosphere, such as mountains, in consequence of the great quantity of atmosphere between your eye and the mountains, appear blue and almost of the same hue as the atmosphere itself. Hence, you must make the nearest mountain of its real color, but the more distant ones make them less defined and bluer here. And those you wish look farthest away, you must make them proportionately bluer. Thus, if one is to be 5 times as distant, make it 5 times bluer. And you can see that he did that as he processes back into space to make them seem, those Balze, to make them seem farther and farther away, he has them bluer and bluer. He also asked, why is the sky blue? And his answer is, I say that the blueness we see in the atmosphere is not intrinsic color, but is caused by warm vapor evaporated in minute and insensible atoms on which the solar rays fall, rendering them luminous. So he describes an experiment that you can do to mimic the effect, which he, of course, wants to do in his art. So he says, paint a board with an intense black. Put on it a very fine and transparent layer of lead white. You will see that the white of this lead white paint will actually be a beautiful blue, but it has to be very finely ground. So what he's talking about, so both of those concepts, how the eye perceives distance, why the sky is blue, and then also how it is that Leonardo can paint these optical effects. This depends on small particles scattering light that cause an optical phenomenon that causes our eyes to see blue. So today, scientists call this scattering, and it seems that Leonardo has really gotten this figured out. So what you're looking at here is a paint chip that was taken from the bluish area of this painting, which is a major work of art, which we don't have time to go into everything. So in a future class, we'll talk about the Madonna and Child with Saint Anne. For today, we're just going to look at the paint chip. So this paint chip shows us that you can see there's 2 layers of white. One is plain white. One has little dots of blue in it up here. So Leonardo chose materials according to what he wanted them to do, thinking about this optical phenomenon and scattering. And he actually chose a less expensive, low-grade lead white paint for the number A layer, this layer down here with no pigment in it. And the list on the right is a shopping list, and he bought, let me confirm this, he bought 5 pounds of lead white that cost 3 lira a pound. And that's what he used for that base layer. He just slopped it on everywhere, relatively low grade, big particle lead white paint as his ground. And then he bought 1.5 pounds of lead white at 4 lira a pound, so clearly a higher grade. And he just said he wants it to be very, very finely ground so that he has these very small particles to work with. And he's working with this blue layer. And instead of loading it up with blue pigment, he uses hardly any. I mean, you can count like 6 grains of ultramarine that are dispersed in this oil layer with the lead white. And it's the lead white that does the scattering and creates the shade of blue that Leonardo wants for his recession into space. It's kind of a lot to wrap your head around. I mean, he's literally figured out why the sky is blue and how to represent that on a panel, and he's using the scattering of the kind of rays of light and how it scatters color. Pretty amazing. So Leonardo, the artist, obviously was well on his way to being a scientist. Here's another painting that uses everything we've just talked about. Similar effects are used to produce the background, the recession into space, and etc. This is a portrait of Lisa del Giocondo, also known as La Gioconda, or in English we call it the Mona Lisa. She was born Lisa Gherardini. In 1495, she married Francesco del Giocondo. This is in Florence. He's a silk merchant. He's an associate of Ser Piero, the notary. So that's probably how Leonardo got this commissioned and perhaps why he accepted this commission. This is in a moment when he wasn't particularly interested in completing paintings. He did start this painting in 1501, and we know that by 1503 it was partially complete. So Leonardo had a lot of stuff going on. He was interested in a lot of other things. He did work on this painting and bring it pretty much near completion, if not totally complete. He was reluctant to declare it finished, though, and he kind of tweaked it for the next decade and never even handed it over to the commissioner, which was relatively common for Leonardo. And I imagine the commissioner wasn't super surprised. And I don't think any money actually changed hands on this one in any event. It's a little bit hard to see because there are layers of varnish that were added later by restorers, which have completely distorted the colors. There's a lot of, basically, it's Leonardo's painting with a layer of yellow on top of it. The Louvre apparently has no, this painting's in the Louvre. I think everybody knows that because it's the most famous painting on the planet. The Louvre has no plans to restore this because they're worried about public reaction. Again, this painting, it was stolen in 1911, and that sort of created the hype that led to this painting being so super famous. So people are used to seeing it with this murky, dark brown effect. And I think the Louvre fears a total revolt if they were to clean off the dirt on the surface. You can kind of compare that to the Vatican making the decision to actually clean Michelangelo's Sistine ceiling. And this is an idea of what surface cleaning can do to reveal the artist's intention underneath. I'm in the camp of the dirt needs to go. You can actually see the painting. You can't really see the Mona Lisa. But we get an idea of what it looks like from a copy that was done by Francesco Melzi. This is a faithful copy in the Prado in Madrid. It was done contemporaneously in the studio of Leonardo. Melzi was an assistant to Leonardo. He was actually sort of an adopted son to Leonardo. He was with him in France through the time of his death and actually inherited all of his notebooks and whatnot. So this is a copy of the Mona Lisa, contemporary, by somebody who was in Leonardo's studio. So you can see things like, for example, she does have eyebrows, or she did. An overzealous cleaning took the eyebrows off of the original. So she looks kind of like an alien. But she apparently did have eyebrows. You can also see the colors of her drapes. Remember, she's married to a silk merchant. She's wearing just luscious silks some embroidered with some thicker, some very transparent veils, just, gorgeous, gorgeous silks in her costume. And then, of course, the background, which is very similar to the painting that we looked at before with the gradations of blue as we recede into the distance. You can also see that she's sitting on a parapet on a chair, and it's a round chair called a pozzetto chair. Hers does not have upholstery, but she's kind of got it turned. She's kind of turned perpendicular to the arm of her pozzetto chair. And I always think of her as sitting on this little balcony over here. This property is called, the house there on the bottom right is called Vigna Maggio. It's now a winery and a hotel in Chianti, but it was one of the Gherardini family properties. So it was one of her family properties. So I always picture her sitting up here with this view of the background. So you can see she's sitting in this chair, kind of on the parapet. Here she's framed by columns. And then the background is invented by Leonardo based on what he's working at this time, which of course is the Arno River Valley. You can see the Ponte a Buriano here on the right this time. And then you've got the river landscape, and almost looks like he's painted that prehistoric lake back here, receding to leave the Balze. The face of Lisa Gherardini del Giocondo was modeled by Leonardo using this sfumatura technique that he developed really masterfully using oil paints. He uses dozens of thin little layers of barely tinted, oil paint, hardly any pigment like we saw before. And he kind of layers these glazes up to create very lifelike modeling. He said that, there are no lines in nature. There are, no hard lines, that the atmosphere between our eye and the object we're looking at tends to kind of blur them out. So the way the eye actually perceives objects is how he paints it here. Again, using the very just masterful use of oil paints. This was kind of revolutionary. There were other painters who were doing things that were similar, but it was a big deal in Florence at the time in particular because his contemporaries were not doing this. They were doing the opposite of this. On the right, you can see on the top the head of Venus. This is Botticelli, Birth of Venus in 1485. He's one of the fathers, really, of the Florentine Renaissance. He's all about line. And then Michelangelo on the bottom right, this is the face of the Virgin in the Doni Tondo, 1504. So Leonardo is painting the Mona Lisa when Michelangelo is painting the Doni Tondo, and they have absolutely two just, 180 degrees opposite ways of approaching painting. Leonardo's trying to represent atmosphere, and then Michelangelo, who's kind of a sculptor at heart, is working in the kind of classic Florentine line and showing almost sculptural forms. One last little look here at the Mona Lisa. As to her smile, it's most likely an emblem of the sitter. Leonardo did that in his portraits, and here are three female portraits by Leonardo. Ginevra da Vinci on the left, 1475. Her name is Ginevra, which is very similar to the word for juniper, Ginepro, and he's got a juniper bush behind her. In the center, Cecilia Gallerani, the painting is known as the Lady with the Ermine. The sitter's last name, though, Gallerani, is similar to the Greek word for ermine. So she's been shown with an ermine. And then the Mona Lisa on the right. So in Europe, she's known as La Gioconda because she's married to Francesco del Giocondo, hence she's La Gioconda. And the word means in Italian, it means happy. So she's depicted with a smile. So that, I think, is a really good explanation of the Mona Lisa smile. And I did not make that up. I read that. Continuing on works in water. Late into Leonardo's career, he made an entire series of deluge drawings. So he's kind of imagining this, really destructive force from water, from wind, which he realized was caused by evaporating water, turbulence, cataclysmic action of water and air, and really imagines the full and destructive power of water. We don't have words to go along with this. A lot of his the drawings that we've just looked at had notes in the margin, and here we're not really sure what he's getting at, but he did, I'm not sure how many, there are 8 or 10 maybe of these deluge drawings that are really just kind of horrific. On a less destructive note, here is a study of a practical application of water evaporation and the power of steam. This is a mechanism, this is a cauldron. You can build a fire under here. The water will begin to boil, create vapor, and the steam is going to push this cover up and move by pulleys the weight over here. So he's thinking about how you can harness the power of steam. He puts that into use using not necessarily water, but air. And he designed a spit roaster. So this is a mechanism literally for making roast meats. And he has the fires down here. Here you can see the alare. I want you to notice. Can y'all see here? Can you see my alare? È visibile, Lorenzo. It's the exact same thing. Look, you can put a spit right here. Look. So he designed one of these where you don't have to stand there and turn the spit with your hand. It's actually automatic, and it harnesses the power of the hot air. There's a fan up here in the chimney that spins. And the hotter your fire is, the more quickly it spins and the more quickly it turns your spit of meat. This was designed for a Medici hunting villa at Artimino, which is this. And it's been reproduced here in this restaurant called Da Delfina. And we're sitting here on the terrace of Da Delfina looking at the Medici hunting villa. And they have actually made a version of Leonardo's spit. And you can see, here's the spit here. Some of y'all have actually been here with me before. You recognize Carlo, he's the last Tuscan. He said he's the last real Tuscan. Carlo had them install, or it may have been his father or grandfather, who installed Leonardo's spit mechanism. Leonardo, however, turns out we have this a written account from someone who knew him really well. He didn't eat meat. Leonardo was a vegetarian. So I don't think he'd have been partaking in Carlo's spit roasted meat. He did like wine, though, and in his various notebooks wrote, he made notes on the varietals he tasted during his travels. And he apparently invented the colmatore, or the airlock, which you see on top of all the barrels here. I'm sure any of y'all who visited a vineyard have probably seen this. There's a water chamber right here, which lets CO2 out, but it does not let oxygen in. It also allows the winemaker to control the level of wine. Wine evaporates, it expands, it contracts because of temperature, moon phases, just plain old evaporations, even through the kind of minute fractures of the barrels. And you really don't want any oxygen in your wine barrel. So if you can keep the level up here in this glass mechanism, you can see it, and you can add wine as necessary as it evaporates. Apparently, Leonardo also liked soup, or at least we know he ate it. This is one of the last sheets that Leonardo worked on. Here he's working on geometric studies. And the notes say that what he's doing is he's working on right triangles with different sized legs, and he's trying to change the size of the legs but keep the area the same. And he's explaining this, and he gets to the last line down here in the corner, and he says, et cetera, perché la minestra si fredda. The soup is getting cold. So off he goes to eat some soup for supper. You're looking at a 1516 portrait that was done by Melzi, the same guy who did the copy of La Gioconda that we saw there in the Prado. So Leonardo, this is one of his final pages of his manuscript, one of the last portraits that was done by him of Melzi in 1516. He died 3 years later in Clou in France in service of the king. So we're going to make, or actually Lorenzo's going to make, and we have this one. Lorenzo's going to make us some acqua cotta, cooked water, which is a simple Tuscan vegetable soup, and he'll tell y'all all about that. I made castagnacho, which I'm going to show you dessert before we get to the main course. And here it is. Castagnacho is, I don't know if you can see it. It's a chestnut
Elaine,
flour.
Elaine,
Sì.
togli il video, mettiti in
Fine.
primo piano. Togli il video condiviso.
Oh, bene. Okay. Good point. Really quick then, I'm going to show you this in a second. If you want information on travel, down here, elainetrigiani.com. And I put in a picture of some olio della donna olive oil bottles. All the information for olive oil is on oliodelladonna.com. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Yeah.
Stop share, and then I'll show
And
you
you
my
show cast.
castagnaccio. So this is castagnaccio. This is made with, this is just typical Tuscan cucina povera, which the soup is as well. And Lorenzo will talk more about that when he starts cooking. This is made with chestnut flour, olive oil, water, a couple of little needles from rosemary, and a few pieces of walnuts and some raisins. There you go. Stuff everybody has in their house. If you're in Tuscany, you have chestnut flour. And the Tuscans go crazy for this stuff as a dessert. I actually like it better with a glass of red wine for an appetizer, but you can also serve it as dessert. It's um, the sweetness comes from the chestnut flour, which means it's really not very sweet at all. But it's quite good. It's a nice little wintry snack, basically. All right, so I'm going to pass
Wait.
the
You
hammer to
have to
Lorenzo.
show you have to show now because you are in the little window before, so you can show the Giraroston.
Oh, the Gioconda, right? So.
Yeah,
Oh, I was in a little window. Right. I forgot that you were looking at the bigger screen.
yeah.
So this is my fireplace, which has the exact same alare that Leonardo drew with the little rounded foot. And then it has these little hooks right here so that you can actually put a spit here and you can move the coals under here. And this is a shovel. But if you had a little mechanism that you could turn, you could do spit roasting.
Okay.
Or if you built Leonardo's mechanism, you could just build a fire and it would be automatic and you could have a drink while your roast cooked itself.
Yeah, it's interesting that Leonardo make a Girarosto, but he is vegetarian.
Well, Leonardo was working for a patron, and I think if the Medicis wanted to have roast meat, the Medicis were going to have roast
A lot
meat.
of, yeah, a lot of.
There you go.
So I put my screen. So sorry for my hair.
All right, so
Okay.
Lorenzo's going to make his
Hi,
screen.
all. So now you have to see me. I put my camera down because you have to see not me, but what I do. And so I hope that you see all the things that I have over there. So
Can
I
y'all
show you.
see?
Sorry?
No, voglio essere sicuro che loro ti vedono. Can y'all see what Lorenzo's doing?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay.
Okay. So the ingredients of this kind of preparation it's not very it's not a very a recipe very that where you have the amount of the ingredients because the history of the best soup that we have in Tuscany it's that you have to do with what you have. So the poor family sometimes aren't only the things that they can find. So, like for example, leek and celery. In autumn, they have fresh oh yeah, mushrooms,
Mushroom.
and then garlic, for example, and eggs. And then they
Things
try to
that
make
all farmer
something.
families would have. And what he's saying is you don't have to, it's not a strict recipe, it's an idea.
No, no. So that you have to make in for example, if you make this acqua cotta in summer, you have, for example, a lot of tomatoes and onions and all different ingredients. If you made in winter, you can have cauliflower or cabbage.
Lush.
In autumn, you have mushrooms, and then you have pumpkin. You can make with the ingredients that you can find. So I made my version of acqua cotta, and I start with the garlic. I don't know. I start with the with on my fire. So I already made a little bit of broth because I need it. And in the broth, I put a little bit of dried mushrooms for the flavor. And then I start to chop my garlic. without put anything on my finger because it's a vegetarian dish.
Good one.
So no,
So we were talking about this is a really
yeah,
typical cucina povera, just like the castagnato that I made. And these
yeah,
are ingredients that just people would have in their house. You'd have some chickens living in the courtyard, and somebody went out and foraged some mushrooms, and this is your soup. And it's literally called cooked water. And then it's made, richer with the eggs, and he's actually going to pour it over a piece of toast, which makes it a little bit heartier.
yeah. So it's the I would like to say that um, the important is for the ancient recipe is to use what you have. It's the same thing that you made with, for example, papal pomodoro or ribollita, or also, for example, panzanella. It's different way to reuse the thing that you find um, in your garden, in your kitchen, and sometimes, for example, is that you see we can have the liver of the chicken, and this is the best way to make a good crostini toscani, for example.
So he's just
But
listed off 4 or 5 classic Tuscan recipes, and they're all with, things that you might be tempted to toss, like a chicken liver, maybe. A lot of people are
yeah,
going to go for the white meat, but no, we're not doing that in Tuscany. Or literally day-old bread, or 2 or 3 day-old bread. Bread does not get
yeah,
tossed. Nothing gets tossed. They make
no,
acqua cotta or crostini neri or
yeah. So
ribollita.
yeah, all the best recipe that you find in Tuscany is the poor recipe. So now I cut my leek. I use all the leek, also the green part of the leek, because we don't have to throw anything. And then I cut my celery. I don't need to peel off the celery because the cooking for a long time it make that I don't need to also don't to cut in little pieces.
Because it gets soft.
Yeah, because I add broth to cook themselves, so I put all together because in the ancient doesn't have time to make different kind of preparation and different time to make the cooking time for example, if you make ribollita, you have to put some ingredients in the correct order because, for example, if you put potatoes too late, the rest hard. But this is more similar celery and leek.
Oh, so they have the same cooking time, so you don't even have to
Yeah.
worry about what you put in when you can just dump it all in together. Have you already turned the flame on, Lorenzo?
Sorry?
Hai già acceso la fiamma sotto?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
C'è olio or no?
Yeah, I use I would like to use Elaine olive oil, but I finish myself my and so I use the Intini oil, you know,
I would
Elaine?
like Lorenzo to use Elaine's olive oil also.
Yeah. But
But Lorenzo's in Florence and I'm here, so I didn't have a chance to get him a bottle. So
yeah,
he's using Intini
I
olive oil.
and this Intini olive oil I take in a Puglia trip for this summer with Elaine and the other people. And so it's very interesting oil. It's a monoculture. And I use olivastra to cook and then also
So we
to
went to
finish.
on our Puglia trip, we went to visit
Yeah,
Intini, Pietro Intini, the olive oil producer. This is another one of my olive oils. This is my Sicilian oil. Pietro Intini is one of the founders of this organization called FIOI, which Olio della Donna is a member of, and we're an association of small producers who follow the entire production process. We don't just buy oil and stick it in a bottle. We very carefully farm our own olives and follow the entire production process, picking, milling, and then we bottle our oils. So me, are very proud to be members of FIOI. And the trip to Puglia, one of the great visits is that we get to go and talk to the
Pietro.
wonderful Pietro Ventini, who is a
Yeah,
lovely, lovely human being, a
yeah,
good olive oil producer,
really,
great person.
really very wonderful person. And so I add a little bit of broth.
Broth or water?
You can make both. If you want in winter, I prefer broth for the texture of the soup.
Mhm.
But you can use also water. It's the same.
Okay.
If you want more rich soup, you can use broth. If you want to have a smooth but not very heavy soup, you can use water. And then
Okay, great.
the mushrooms. This is a mixed mushrooms. It's a porcini, chiodini, and other kind of
You can use
mushrooms.
whatever mix of mushrooms you can find.
Yeah, yeah,
And you don't have to forage. You can go to the store.
yeah. Also, if you have a refrigerated one, because it's not the period is not
Or
good for have.
dried. You can use dried
Or
porcini
yeah,
also.
but dried is better for the taste for the water. If you want for them to have in the mouth, I prefer to don't have dried inside of this.
Well, you can use a mix. I like to use a mix because you get a little
Yeah,
porcini flavor in the water. Yeah, 'cause you could make a broth out of it. You could use the porcini
yeah,
water as the broth. That would do. Give it some more
yeah,
extra flavor.
yeah. I put more porcini in the broth,
Mm.
and I use also this.
Hmm.
So then the question is, uh, we can use also tomatoes or not, because Leonardo doesn't have tomatoes, for example.
Yeah, I was like, Lorenzo, don't use tomatoes because Leonardo never tasted a tomato, right? So tomatoes come from the
Yeah,
New World.
but I
1492,
love
Columbus
tomatoes.
went to the New World. Slowly but surely, certain things, chocolate, for example, tomatoes were brought over to the Old World, but that took a while. And on top of it, tomatoes were considered poisonous. They were used as ornamental plants and they were considered poisonous. And I don't know if Leonardo ever ate a tomato, but I just don't think that they were considered edible during his lifetime.
Yeah,
So me
but
personally,
you,
I would not be using the tomatoes, but Lorenzo does what he wants, and so we'll
no,
see.
no, I think tomatoes sometimes you can use only to have a better look for your
He
soup.
likes the color.
Yeah, only for the color. For the taste, it's not very important to have tomatoes now, because usually, for example, when I make a sauce for pasta with the mushroom, I don't use tomatoes.
They
I
clash.
only, yeah. But for a soup, I show you the difference, because the one that I have already prepared, I put a little bit of tomatoes, only two peeled tomatoes, because we don't have fresh tomatoes now, or better,
Right.
you
Plus,
have in the
plus it's winter.
supermarket,
There
but
are
the
no
taste.
tomatoes.
You find tomatoes every day of the
But
year,
you,
but
but Lorenzo, did you use
yeah,
tomatoes or canned tomatoes?
I use peeled canned tomatoes
Okay, so he did not
now
buy
in
tomatoes.
winter.
He used jarred tomatoes. He did not go buy a tomato in December at the market. They don't have any
No,
flavor.
no, 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 no. In winter I prefer to buy canned peeled tomatoes, not fresh tomatoes.
I
If you
actually just
buy
don't use
fresh
it anymore.
tomatoes, it's you can buy water. It's the same flavor. So I put I made cooking the this is a leek and garlic and mushrooms and celery, and I'm going to add the broth or the water if you prefer. Now I add the water, the broth. Usually I use a liter of broth, and I leave cooking with the low temperature, low fire for 40 minutes. So I add salt,
So it basically cooks itself in 40 minutes. You just do some chopping,
Yeah.
set the timer to 40
Pepper.
minutes.
Yeah, I stopped. I I I put this. Okay. You see the color of the of is brown
Uh-huh.
because because the mushrooms give this kind of color. And I show the same soup, made it this morning. The difference of the color.
Yeah, it looks a little more inviting with a couple of tomatoes in there.
Okay.
Mhm.
So the recipe is finished. So I have to close and put in my oven for 40 minutes and leave cooking there. So I don't have to make anything else. But before to serve, the best way is to take a little bit of old bread. I forget to buy the bread 2 days ago, so I take fresh bread and I put in the oven for a minute. And so I have my fresh Tuscany bread. You see the color. The white is the new, it's oven. And so I
Toasted stuff.
chunk, yeah, I cut the, and then if you are very, if you want a very good taste, you take a little bit of garlic and you make like a little bruschetta
This
to
is the
make
Tuscan trick, makes everything taste good. So he's,
oh,
yes, he's rubbing it
not a
on there.
lot, not a lot.
Yeah, a little bit goes a long way, but yeah, very yummy.
You can take someone like this and someone you can chunk, and then I take and I put a little bit of bread down. But before I have to use my eggs. So I take a little bowl. I put a little bit of olive oil.
That is the original garlic bread. Toast rubbed with garlic and then oil.
So I take an egg and then I take the egg and I put directly inside. And I leave cooking the egg in the soup. Close. I low down my fire and I wait for a minute. It's like I have why do you say uovo in camicia, Elaine?
We don't say well then camicia. He's making a what do we call it? Soft boiled egg? No, what do we call it? What do we call it when you cook you cook the egg in water? What do we call that? Soft boiled egg? Can somebody write that in the
Huh?
chat for me? They call it a in camicia,
I
egg in
have
a
to.
shirt.
They cannot answer you because I say that you
Poached.
can
No, but it's in the
wait.
chat. Yes.
Poached.
Grazie a tutti. Poached egg. He's making a poached egg and he's poaching it directly in the soup.
Okay.
And
So
the
I
Italian, they don't say poached. They say uova in
in
camicia, egg in a
yeah.
shirt. Because once it's cooked, it looks like it has a little white shirt on. So while the eggs are poaching, he's preparing the bowls to serve in. So the bottom of the bowl gets toast rubbed with
Yeah.
garlic and some olive oil.
I wait that the egg cook.
All right, so he's waiting for the eggs to cook. we have gone over as usual because we're long-winded. But if y'all have any questions about Leonardo or about the recipe, you can type them into the chat right now, and we'll respond while the eggs are poaching, while they're putting their
Yeah.
shirt on.
You want the video now?
No, va bene così, non importa.
Okay. I show you the poaching egg. So
Someone just asked, is there any written communication between Leonardo and Michelangelo? I do not think that there is. Um, People talk about a rivalry or at least some kind of bad feelings. Michelangelo tended to be kind of brusque anyway. Leonardo was a mature artist and an older person, really, when Michelangelo burst onto the scene at a very young age and was kind of taking everybody by storm. Leonardo, who liked those, who tended to do those very lithe, beautiful figures, made a remark that when you are a remark probably directed at Michelangelo. When you're depicting muscles, you should be very careful that, as far as like big bulging muscles goes, those muscles only bulge if the limb is in action. So the resting limb does not have bulging muscles. The limb that's lifting something up has bulging muscles. Otherwise, your drawing looks like a sack full of walnuts. So this was kind of said, and it's presumed to be directed towards Michelangelo, who, all of his figures are like, even the females have big bulging muscles. So I don't think we have, as far as I know, there's no direct correspondence between the two, but there was a little bit of back and forth. Yes, I'll be sending the recipes tomorrow. I'll send the soup recipe, acqua cotta, and the recipe for the castagnacho, which I'll be eating as soon as we sign off here. I know the bulging muscle comment is hilarious. Um, and it is, everybody pretty much presumes that it's directed at, Leonardo directed it right at Michelangelo. So Lorenzo's finishing up over here. Siamo vicini, Lorenzo.
eccolo qua.
Oh, he's done. Look, he served it. Soup, acqua cotta with poached egg, uova in camicia, and
You see the
garlic.
egg?
Yeah, I wish I was there.
Yeah.
I was in Florence at your house, Lorenzo.
Yeah. Normally I have the I want to be in Poppiano with you. Today you want to be with me.
I know, usually I cook and he wants to be here. Not tonight. He's got dinner already
No?
made. Excellent. Any more questions, you guys, on recipes or Leonardo? If you want, we can undo microphones. I don't think anybody has any questions. We've gone
Yeah.
super late. Oh, here we go.
We
Hang
have
on. Oh,
we
thoughts on
have a
the
lot
new
of
Burns document.
we have a lot of questions. Are you seeing the chat
I'm
box?
I'm seeing the chat box. Oh, so somebody said thoughts on the new
Yeah.
Ken Burns documentary. I was really like scared off by the Ken Burns documentary because I decided to talk about Leonardo before I knew he did one. And I thought, oh no, I have to go after Ken Burns. This is not right. I don't want to go after Ken Burns. Um, Meanwhile, I think it was Ken Burns's, I don't think Ken Burns actually did the documentary himself. I think he was on the production team or something, but it was no, it was done by like his daughter and husband or something, her husband. I don't think Ken Burns actually did all the work of putting the information together. Um, it wasn't my favorite Ken Burns, but I also I know a lot about Leonardo already, and so maybe I already had my own thoughts on, how I would, I don't know. It
You
wasn't
know
wasn't my
that
but
you know
I'm the
that
person.
also Ken Burns is a plugin in Photoshop, for example.
Yes. No, it is. You can do Ken Burns effect because Ken Burns
Yeah.
has his photography effects are part of various filters and whatnot that you can do in Photoshop. So okay, y'all, thank you for tuning in. Thank you to all of y'all. Oh, it was the three of them. It was his daughter as well. Right. Yeah, I was not super thrilled, but again, just me. Thanks, y'all. Happy holidays to everybody. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Bye, everybody. I'm still reading chats. Grazie a voi. Thanks to everybody. Buon Natale. Merry Christmas to everybody. I'll be in touch tomorrow with recipes. And if you have any more questions, just shoot me an email. Bye.